Hello, everyone. I just want to say once again how sorry I am that you have to suffer through watching me on screen talk for a little bit. I'm going to try to keep this to about 45 minutes, so you have about 15 minutes to go through and answer the questions that I'll put on Blackboard, and then that will count as your attendance today. If you could go ahead and post yours and then respond to a couple other people, that would be great. And just have that done sometime before we meet for class again on Monday. I think that it would be a good idea to try to do it sooner rather than later because you have a lot more reading for next Monday as well, and so to keep those ideas fresh in your head. But I am just bummed about this class because this is one of my favorite topics. It's one of my favorite days to teach, and it's really interesting stuff. So hang with me, and I'll try to get through. I'm going to basically walk you through what we are going to do in class today, give you some questions to kind of ponder, and then send you on your way to enjoy but stay safe in the snow in Greenville. We have gotten a lot in Raleigh so far. All right, so what is the role of controversial issues in civic education? That is our question to think about today. And right off the bat, I know that controversial issues are something that makes people nervous to think about, especially with teaching, and I hope that the readings for today helped you think a little bit more thoroughly about what the possible role for controversial issues could be in civic education and why it might be necessary as a teacher for you to engage with the ideas of controversial issues a little bit, especially in social studies education. So what we are going to do for our class meeting today was a little greet and share. So we're going to pass around a ball, which I'll show you next week, and share about our MLK weekend, ask people questions as we pass the ball, saying our name, saying hello to one another. Next week, we're going to do a really important sharing. So I put on your calendar that you need to bring in a small item that says something about you. It doesn't have to have your name on it. It doesn't need to be something written down. It could be an artifact. And you're going to bring that in a paper bag or a plastic bag to class. And we're going to bundle them all up, and then we're going to take some and guess whose is whose. And we're going to do a little bit of historical thinking with them to kind of think about if we were historians of the future and we were to dig up these artifacts, what would they say about the people who lived during this time period? So it can be anything. It could be, I wouldn't suggest bringing something like your great grandmother's like 2-carat diamond ring. You are going to get these items back, but I don't want to be responsible for any family heirloom that's going to get lost potentially. So it could be something off your desk. It could be a document, anything that means a little bit to you or you feel like says a little bit something about yourself. And then we'll share what they mean to us as well. That'll be part of our morning meeting on Monday. All right, and then we're going to go to an activity. Our activity today was thinking about what makes something social studies. This is something I asked you to think about on your pre-assessment for me on Qualtrics. And the reason for that is because lots of times students come into this course thinking, well, history is what is social studies. And I'm hopefully during that first class, we were able to broaden your horizons a little bit about that social studies is more than just history. It includes these other social science disciplines such as economics, geography, culture, the behavioral sciences, and it's all used in schools to help develop citizens for democracy. But even then, sometimes students get a little bit narrowed in their vision of what social studies is. So I put up this example of this QU wedding idea from Pinterest. So basically, this is not something I'm promoting, and I'll share more about it in the future with you guys. But basically, this is something that's being shared across Pinterest, across teachers, pay teachers as this really good literacy lesson. So basically, the teachers put on a wedding that their students take part in. The boy's often a U, the girl is a Q, or sometimes the girl is a U and the boys are Qs, and they have a wedding and they get married. And the point of it is to teach students about the spelling rule that often Q and U go together. So the students dress up, the girls dress in white, the boys dress up in lots of different things. Sometimes the girls dress as queens and the boys dress as quarterbacks using that spelling rule. And they put on a wedding. Sometimes parents come, sometimes they sing songs, and it can be quite elaborate. I would encourage you to Google QU wedding and see what comes up. But my question for you is this social studies? And if not, why not? And if so, why is it? So spend a little bit of time thinking about it. Is this social studies? All right, so now that you've thought about it, I'm going to share my opinion with you. I believe that this is social studies. I don't think it's good social studies, and again, we'll talk more about that later on in the semester. But I think this is social studies because it's imparting to students ideas about how the social world works. So even though the intent of the teacher was to teach that Q and U often go together in spelling, and that seems like a literacy lesson, the teacher, by having this giant wedding that follows very Protestant, white European norms of what a wedding looks like, and also always has one male and one female. It is also imparting some ideas to students about how the social world works, that this is what a wedding looks like, that this is how a family starts, that this is what people do when they get married. And we know that that isn't quite authentic to what many of our students' families are like. And it's not authentic to what many of their wedding ceremonies are like. And so by valuing this idea of what a wedding looks like over other ideas of what a wedding looks like, the teachers are imparting some social studies lessons, some lessons about the social world. And so I want you to keep thinking about that, because even though we approach the subject of controversial issues, even though the teacher who taught this, and there's many of them across the United States who do this, they probably said, I'm not teaching anything controversial, or I'm not teaching anything about social studies. Just by what they were saying about the social world in their literacy lesson, they really are giving students ideas about what the social world does and should look like. So keep thinking about that. So what is social studies? And we're going to go through some activities later in the semester where we try to think more about if there is social studies in our other subject areas, if it's good social studies, or if we want to change it a little bit to make it better social studies. Okay, so moving on. So our message today for our morning meeting is a quote from George Counts, who was a social reconstructionist. You read about the social reconstructionist from last week. And he says, if an educational movement or any other movement calls itself progressive, it must have orientation. It must possess direction. The word itself implies moving forward, and moving forward can have little meaning in the absence of clearly defined purposes. And this relates to what we're going to talk about in class today, because if we think about our job as teachers of social studies is to develop citizens for democracy, we have to decide what those goals look like. What should a citizen for a democracy, what skills should they have? What content should they know? What things should they be interested in doing? What values should they cultivate? So if we're going to do a good job of this, we have to decide what our goals are in education, especially in social studies education. We need to pick a direction of where we're going in order to meet those goals. And so a lot of teachers say, well, I'm not going to pick any direction about what citizens should know or do because I don't want to be biased. Well, the simple truth is that no matter what we do, we're always imparting those ideas about the social world to our students, just like the teachers are in the QU wedding. And so if we want to be intentional about being authentic to the diversity in our country, we need to really think about what goals we have for citizens in our country. So whether you're doing it intentional or you're not doing it intentional, you're always valuing some history over other history. You're always valuing some ideas about what the social world looks like versus other ideas. And so we can't say we're just not going to do that. We have to embrace the fact that that's just part of what we do in schools and think about how we can do that intentionally. So keep thinking about that. So George Counts says we need to pick a direction if we want to say we're moving forward, if we want to say we are going to improve our world through education. And I know many of us say that. We say we want to be teachers because we want to make the world better. We have to think about, what does that better world look like? So something to keep thinking about from our message. All right, so once we've thought about that social world that we want to work towards, we have to decide what should be included in the social studies curriculum then. What should we include if we want to cultivate citizens who are prepared to engage in a really great democracy? So some people would say that there's a list of facts that just every citizen in the country needs to know. would like you to go really quickly, to pause the video and go really quickly to YouTube and search for jaywalking from the Jay Leno Show. And so if you're not familiar with this is something that Jay Leno used to do on The Tonight Show. He used to go out in the street and he used to ask people questions like, who was the first president of the United States? Or who's the president today? Stuff like that we would hope that most people in our country who are participating in our democracy would know the answer to. And there were plenty of people they found who didn't have the answers to those questions, which is really discouraging, right? And so sometimes, especially when they said they were teachers. But what is interesting about that is thinking about, okay, so if we were to put together this list of facts, things every citizen should know, what would be on that list? And who would get to decide what's on that list? So during this part of the class, I was going to do what we call a continuum discussion, where in one corner, we have the words fact-based education. In the other corner, we have issue-centered. And so I was going to have you line up about where you think you would fall into for that social studies, deciding what should be in the social studies. So on one side, we have people who are like, yep, there are facts that just everybody should know in order to participate in our democracy. On the other side, people might say, well, actually, I'm less concerned about what facts people know and more concerned that they can engage in democratic issues. And so, yeah, they might miss a few of these facts in their education, but if I can focus and really engage them in democratic issues and democratic problems that we have, then they're actually going to be more engaged in our democracy moving forward. Okay, so we would line up in a continuum and we would say, all right, if you think you really think it should be fact-based on this side, if you think it should be issue-centered, you're going to go in this corner. If you're somewhere in between, kind of place yourself, your body, in the continuum of where you think the social studies curriculum should be. And lots of people are in the middle or a little bit more towards one side. And then I would have you turn to someone who believes the same thing you do. And you turn and talk to them about why you put yourself where you put yourself. And then I would number you off and from one side of the room to the other. And then I would have you find someone who had a different number than you, like at least 5 numbers off. So you could talk to someone who had a different view than you. So this is a discussion strategy that you can write down and that you can use in your lesson. So this gives students an opportunity to think about an issue that there's 2 different opinions on, or where they might fall in the middle, and then have them talk to someone who agrees with them and find out the reasons why they agree with the same position they do, but also have someone talk to someone who doesn't agree with them, who thinks differently, and to learn from why they think differently. All right, so then I would push the conversation just a little bit further, and I would have you come up and go to look at a list that I have here. So in fact, in the 80s and 90s, there was a guy, a curriculum theorist, who did believe that there was a list that everybody should just know some facts in the world, and he called this being culturally literate. He said, I can make a list of stuff that students should know. They should learn in schools in order to be culturally literate. And so I'm going to share with you, he made a book and he published this list. His name was E.D. Hirsch. And so I'm going to share with you some stuff that was on his list. These are just the A's. This is like one page of the A's. So let me move my screen over so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so sorry if that made anybody dizzy while I moved. I'm trying to not have to do too much editing here. All right, so let's look at this list. So this is some things that he put on his list that said what literate Americans should know, what culturally literate Americans should know. These are the things they should be learning in school so they're culturally literate to be successful in life. So just take a couple minutes to look at that list and see what you think. All right, so one of your questions I'm going to ask you on the Blackboard is what you thought about this list. And so E.D. Hirsch, he felt really good about this list. Other people didn't feel super great about E.D. Hirsch's list. And some of the reasons they didn't feel great is because